let's start out just with a quick level set for the audience. Perhaps you can tell us about XBRL and NIEM and just what they are.
Sure.
Yeah.
XBRL is a really highly developed XML that is used to structure data in financial and business reporting. It's on the move now because it's been adopted by the FDIC and the SEC for businesses to report, regulatory reporting. Most people in the U.S., when they hear about XBRL, associate it with a pretty big taxonomy for what's known as GAAP, Generally Accepted Accounting Principles. It's about 15,000 elements, and it's what's used for companies to file their financials with the SEC.
So what's the current progress? I understand this is mandated, just beginning to be adopted.
Yeah. It's in year 2 of a 3-year phase-in. So about 20% of the total assets, about $35 trillion right now in assets are reported out of about an estimated $180 trillion in the U.S. Every quarter for the last 5 years, every bank in America reports to the FDIC on their suitability for deposit insurance using XBRL. It's pretty invisible in that case, but it's saving enormous amounts of money, and its effect on data quality and the ability to consume it as filed is pretty revolutionary.
We'll come back to that in a minute. So Donna, can you tell us a little bit about NIEM?
Oh, I'd love to.
Yeah.
So NIEM is a program. I like to call it a model that's built for the people by the people, because NIEM is not a federal standard. NIEM is developed by state and locals, and it's a model used for providing data context for data as it moves in between systems, so data in motion and context for that data in motion. And it is used in the 50 states. It is used in approximately 18,000 police departments, approximately 120,000 first responders, and it primarily started with the after 9/11, with the post 9/11 conditions. But it's now being used in open data initiatives and in HHS's Health IT and Meaningful Use. So it's gotten broad adoption and is used probably in 60 to 75% of the federal agencies today.
So there's a concept here, I think, in both XBRL and NIEM of not just raw data, but structured data. Can you talk a little bit about, either of you, about the benefits of structured data, also the challenges of structured data?
So the challenge to me of structured data is that it's actually the smallest part of our data in the federal government, and yet it's the one deeply embedded in the oldest systems. And so in the Department of Homeland Security, I would say that over half of our data sets are in old EPSIDIC mainframes, where the data description sits in COBOL definitions, embedded in your programs. And so getting that structure out, getting it sort of in a way that is mobile and movable and understood by people who the original programmers didn't understand would even have a need for it, is the biggest challenge that we've got today.
Right, so a lot of this open data movement is about getting the data exposed in a way that it can have unintended consequences. People can use it in new ways. We see this in the development of applications by third parties. But let's talk a little bit more about, when you say first responders are using it, what kind of data is being exchanged?
So have you ever been stopped for a police department, by the police for a ticket? Right?
Not I.
No, me. So I just recently
Every once in a while.
When you were stopped, and the officer has about 15 minutes to determine whether or not he gives you a ticket or whether or not you're a bad person. A lot of that information in between the police car and the various sources of information about you, the driver's license, warrants, or any sort of criminal activity, all of that's exchanged using NIEM. And so within 15 minutes, you've got a lot of transactional activity just to determine whether or not he should A, give you a ticket, or B, he should arrest you. Or if you're a potential terrorist, and we sort of need to add more context to that conversation. So
this is a little bit, when you said it started after 9/11, this is partly because you had police and fire who weren't able to communicate with each other, and incompatible systems. We're now talking about how do we actually establish a data level compatibility across all kinds of systems.
Data interoperability is the goal, and that sort of my next goal is to have that data independence, where data can move, where you understand who can open it, who can use it, what it should be used for, sort of on top of NIEM, right? So building security and privacy into your data as it moves is probably where we need to head with data interoperability, and not just structured data, but unstructured data.
So coming back to XBRL, when we spoke, prior to my inviting you here, you told me a little bit about some of the early wins with XBRL. I think you were talking about Swift and for example.
Well, actually, the Swift and DTCC are two acronyms. Most people know Swift, the number on your check. It's the largest network other than the internet, and it's where
Society for Worldwide Interbank Fund Transfer, if I recall.
That's right, very good. And DTCC is less known, but it is the clearinghouse. It is the settlement operation for the United States. So last year that meant about $2.5 quadrillion of transactions flowing through every purchase of every stock, every bank-to-bank payment. And they're involved now from a cost driver, not a compliance driver. We started with the SEC and FDIC, where we were trying to solve the problem of the bigger army of experts versus the bigger pile of paper. Now we're talking about moving different kinds of information. It's really about getting all the way upstream to the issuer. That's why Swift and DTCC are involved with XBRL right now for this thing called corporate actions. These are mergers and acquisitions. There's about 50 different types of corporate actions, dividend payments, rights issues. But this was a really big step forward because we're actually getting all the way upstream to the financial institutions, so it's structured as it's issued. The way our system works now is there's a lot of intermediaries that take paper that comes out of financial institutions and normalizes it in lots of different ways. So there's no one standard agreement on how to represent that data. And a lot of people agree that a lot of our financial crisis was really an information crisis. So just like the kind of risk that Donna and the Homeland Security Department addresses, this is economic risk. This is economic security.
So the essence of what you're saying is when this information is in electronic format rather than in paper format or paper facsimile, because of course you can have electronic formats that are simply pictures and representations of the paper, and that's very hard to analyze. When you get it in this real data format, it becomes possible to analyze it programmatically. It becomes possible to put computers to work dealing with the scale of the problems we have. I think that's really a key concept here, that we have to reinvent our government for the scale of our society. And what we see today with, in the private sector, with services like Google or Amazon or Microsoft Bing, they're dealing with massive amounts of data in real time, delivering it to our mobile phones. And they're doing it through programmatic means. Right. And we're now starting to say, wow, if government is going to keep up with what's happening in the private sector, it too needs to be electronic at the same scale, at the same pace. And in particular in financial markets, which apart from those consumer internet companies are probably the heaviest users of technology on this planet, we really need to get with the program or we're never going to keep up.
It's like a denial of service attack. I mean, the Citibank's annual report to the SEC 10 years ago was 300 pages. It's 1,400 pages now. Mm-hmm. And to find anything, and it's uninterrupted stream of text going to the SEC. It's an HTML document without links. It's one long HTML document. To find things like executive compensation or long-term risk from pensions, you have to pay an intermediary right now to do that.
So now with XBRL, you're defining what are the sort of, when we say structured data, we're talking about defining really a taxonomy of what's interesting that needs to be broken out in a way that it can be easily and quickly identified programmatically.
Right, and we're not actually determining that content of the taxonomy. We're dependent on authoritative sources like FASB for the GAAP accounting rules, or the SEC for regulations, or SWIFT and ISO for corporate actions. That's the content. We're the container.
Right. So Donna, how do you?
So for NIEM, it's, there's probably about 6,000 elements in a model that the state, local, tribal, federal, private sector partners in some of our international partners have agreed upon, the context of those definitions, context of those semantics. And so it's very rich in information about a person, about a place, and some of the other concepts. And so Donna Roy is the same person that goes and gets a driver's license at the DMV, who gets stopped by the police department to sort of get a ticket, is the same person that eventually will have a Medicare card and will go in and get a benefit into a hospital. And so that the middle of the model is very person-centric and very location-centric, and it's very, it's agreed upon, and there's a governance around it. And when you wrap governance around this XML, it can be easily adopted, and you build it into policy frameworks such as post 9/11 or OpenGov or meaningful use around health IT, then you start seeing broad-scale adoption and understanding of data as it moves.
How do you think about privacy in the context of what you're doing?
So we are getting much more mature in how we're building privacy into the model, but we think that privacy starts first, second, and third on any of the development of your information exchange. And since the middle of the model is around person, we've marked parts of the model as very privacy related. So if people use them, they sort of get that annotation that what you're using is privacy related. Potentially you should more safeguard this information as it moves. And I think that NIEM should be built into that policy framework that has privacy first, second, and third as a consideration.
Yeah, this is sort of an interesting concept, which I've certainly had hammered home to me by Jeff Jonas, who you probably know well, which is this idea of identity resolution. You know, one John Smith, how do you tell it's the same John Smith as the other one? Well, if you start collecting additional data, and it pretty quickly becomes clear they have the same social. Well, they're clearly the same person. They have the same address at some point. There's a lot where, as there's more and more data, privacy tends to evaporate. Simply because it's possible to triangulate anybody and anything. Do we have to change our concept of privacy in some fundamental way?
I believe privacy is not just things explicitly about me that you know, my name, my date of birth, my citizenship. It is extended to things that could be indicative of me, you know, where I work or the time frame I worked at a certain location where you could derive that information. So I think that we need to expand out our definition of what privacy really is.
Yeah. So let me ask both of you, in the time we have left, talk about the benefits, not just to government, but also to the private sector in terms of cost savings of open, transparent, structured data.
I think the government as a listening post in the regulatory function, we've already demonstrated that just in terms of the cost, the data quality, the time factor, help us mitigate risk. Whether the consumer is a citizen or the government regulator or an investor, it helps manage risk. When we talk about a larger application of business information, the business-to-business benefit has already been explored, but I think when we talk about combining being able to capture at the source, at the point of origin, that document, and then put it into frameworks like NIEM, I think we're going to see a quantum leap in benefit, because it's not just enough to capture it in a structured way. You have to be able to share it out, and that's a real challenge. I mean, the early applications really thought of it as a very straight line from the corporate issuer to the SEC. But the SEC receiver was still a silo. And being able to share it out across, now that we have financial regulatory reform and this idea of a national data utility to manage counterparties and financial risk, I think the benefits are huge. It's going to facilitate that.
For the federal government and for government in general, say that $82 billion we spent on IT, we're starting to see when we adopt common vocabularies like NIEM that your development costs in the first 10 to 30% of your IT projects go down, right? And so we've been able to talk about 20% costs on our IT development spend internally. But I think that the bigger value is when you send that data out to unknown sort of users, and they're able to do something with that information. They're able to drive information out of that you had not anticipated by matching it with other types of information. And so getting more data out there in the open environment, or even the secure but open environment around local government, is where its real value is.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I think we're out of time, but I think it's really promising what you're both doing, and I think we're going to see huge impact downstream. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Tim.